In 1964, Thomas and Evelyn Carter left their porch light burning and never came home. 30 years later, a crate surfaced in a forgotten stretch of woods, and what was nailed shut inside refused to stay silent. If you're drawn to stories where truth hides beneath roots and rain, stay close. This one begins where silence first took hold. The road that night wound through pine and pasture, a narrow county two-lane that lost its shape whenever the heat rose. Headlights blurred into fireflies, and somewhere near mile marker 22, the Carters' Chevy was last seen easing onto the shoulder. A passing driver thought they'd stopped to watch the storm rolling in from the west. By morning, the car was gone. People remember moments differently. Some said Thomas and Evelyn stopped for coffee at a roadside diner just after midnight, laughing, hands touching across the table. Others swore they saw her near the lumber yard, her scarf trailing behind her as the wind picked up. Rumors filled the space their absence left. That's how most disappearances begin, not with proof, but with stories trying to explain the dark. For years, the Carters were a cautionary tale told by porchlight. Young love gone wrong. A robbery. An accident nobody wanted to find. But no bodies, no car, and no answers. Just a file in a county drawer that grew heavier with each deputy who opened it and found nothing new. The woods north of town kept their own memory. They held the sounds of what was lost. Cicadas droning through thick summer heat, a creek muttering over rock, and the faint pulse of distant freight trains at night. Hunters passed through every season, and children dared each other to cross the old fence line and touch the rusted latch where the Carter property began. No one ever stayed long. People said the woods had moods, sometimes welcoming, sometimes watching. Then, in late autumn of 1994, a storm unstitched the creek bed. Mud slid loose, roots lifted, and something straight-edged pushed up through the bank. A corner of wood, square and deliberate, too even to be nature's work. A man with a chainsaw saw it first. He prodded the shape with a stick, thinking it was an old stump. When the ground gave, revealing edges and nails, he realized it was a box, a crate, buried deep and forgotten. By dusk, sheriff's deputies had taped off the ridge. Floodlights painted the trees in unnatural white. The crate came free with a hiss of suction, its sides slick with clay, nails trembling in their sockets. When the lid was pried open, the first smell was damp paper and oil. The second was time itself, sour, metallic, and tired. Inside were no bones, no wallets, and no remains. Only things meant to speak: a reel-to-reel recorder, several waxed envelopes labeled by hand, a water-warped ledger, and a small tin wrapped in cloth. The officers muttered among themselves. Some wanted to call it junk, old tools forgotten by a survey crew. Others saw the care in the packing of the tar paper lining and the evenly spaced nails, and knew it wasn't random. The state lab took custody by dawn, and the box was hauled away under a tarp that snapped in the wind. Within days, it reached an evidence room in the city. A technician cataloged the contents, typed the usual forms, and placed the crate on a metal table beneath a single buzzing bulb. When he opened the tin, he found fragments of ribbon, a bent key, and a rusted lighter engraved with the initials T.C. That was when they called her. She arrived 2 nights later, a woman who'd spent most of her career chasing echoes, stories that had gone too cold for anyone else to care. Her name was Marian Holt. She wasn't assigned to the Carter case. No one had been for decades. But she knew the story, the legend, the ache that lived in it. She'd grown up 3 towns over, heard their names whispered at sleepovers, and seen the missing posters still tacked to a gas station wall long after the ink had bled into yellow paper. Marian stood at the edge of the evidence table and looked at the open crate. The ledger's spine was broken from being opened too many times. Ink had bled through, where someone pressed hard, like a confession through cheap paper. The reel-to-reel machine sat dormant beside it, its reels corroded but intact. She brushed dust from the label on the topmost envelope. Faded pencil letters spelled Carter, June 14, 1964. She lifted the recorder's lid. Inside, the motor was frozen, but the spool turned when she nudged it. The tape was brittle with age. She set it on the player, rewound carefully, and pressed play. A low hum filled the room, the kind the old microphones made when left too close to silence. Then a man's voice emerged, steady and measured, speaking as though to himself. "If someone is hearing this, it means the woods have forgiven me," he said. The accent was local, rough, untrained. Or maybe I didn't live long enough to tell it properly. The tape hissed, stuttered, and then resumed. June 14th, the night they disappeared. The Carters. I thought I was helping. Marian didn't breathe. The voice on the recording, calm and resigned, spoke of a car that broke down near the old mill road, of headlights seen in the trees, and of promises made too late. There were no names, no confessions, just that phrase again, "I thought I was helping." When the tape clicked to a stop, she sat back, staring at the spool still spinning empty. Outside the lab, rain whispered against the windows. Somewhere beyond the city, 30 miles of pine and silence waited, holding what was left of Thomas and Evelyn Carter's story. By morning, she was already driving toward it. The highway was slick from the storm, the horizon the color of pewter. The county sign came and went. The radio lost signal, leaving only static. She took the old exit no one used anymore and followed it into the woods. The Carter property had long since reverted to wild growth, with grass reclaiming gravel and oaks splitting the foundation of what had once been a porch. The chimney still stood like a scar, stones blackened by moss. Marian parked at the tree line, leaving her engine idling, and stepped out into the damp air. Somewhere ahead, the creek murmured. She thought she could hear the shape of the word "forgiven" in it. She knelt by the porch stones, brushing aside leaves, and saw something half buried in mud. A piece of metal, shaped like a house key, bent near the teeth. When she lifted it, the rusted surface caught a faint trace of engraving. E.C. Evelyn Carter. Marian closed her hand around it. The earth here was still remembered, and the story, even after 30 years, wasn't done remembering her back. Marian drove into town before sunrise, the key wrapped in tissue on the passenger seat, the recorder strapped beside it like a companion. The sky was a dull lavender, the kind that blurs the line between night and morning. She found the diner that had survived the decades with a new sign and the same bones, and parked where the Carters' Chevy had once Saturday. The old-timers still came here. Gray heads bowed over steaming cups of coffee. Conversation kept to a low murmur until the door opened and everyone looked up at once. She took a booth near the window. The waitress, hair pinned high, poured her coffee without asking. "You're not from around here," she said. Marian smiled softly. "Not lately." She unfolded an old clipping from the county archive. It showed Thomas and Evelyn in the days before they vanished. He is in a collared shirt and work jacket. She has a scarf knotted under her chin, bright eyes, and a smile, too confident for the times. Beneath it, the caption read, "Last seen leaving this diner on Highway 7, June 14th, 1964. The waitress stopped wiping the counter. "Those two. The Carters." Marian nodded. "You remember them?" "Everyone remembers them. My mama said they came in the night the power went out. A storm was rolling in. The sky so black it looked like a hole had opened. He ordered pancakes. She barely touched hers. Said she had a bad feeling." "What kind of bad feeling?" The woman shrugged. "Didn't say. Just kept looking out the window, like she knew someone was out there watching." Marian's spoon tapped against her cup. "Have you ever heard anyone talk about Samuel Yates?" The waitress paused. "Yates? Lord, haven't heard that name in years. He ran the filling station by the lumber road. Kept to himself mostly. Died, I don't know, the 70s maybe? His place burned down." She leaned closer. "People said he was the last one to see the Carters alive. He told the sheriff they'd come by for gas, then drove off toward the ridge. But some folks think They never made it past his station. When Marian stepped back outside, the wind had picked up, scattering dust across the lot. The woods pressed close behind the diner, thick and secretive. She looked once toward the ridge in the distance, the direction the Carters had taken, and then drove on. The road narrowed to a cracked lane flanked by pine. Half a mile in, a sign leaned crooked against a post, Yates Service. The letters were barely legible beneath layers of moss. The building behind it sagged under the weight of years. The roof caved at one corner. A faded oil drum sat by the entrance, half buried in vines. Marian pushed the door open. The bell above it gave a weak, dry rattle. Inside, the air smelled of rust and gasoline and old rain. Papers littered the floor. Receipts, ledgers, and torn posters of cars that hadn't rolled off assembly lines in 50 years. Against the back wall, a desk slumped beneath its own decay. She sifted through the papers until she found a logbook dated June 1964. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but she could make out the entries. 4 names were scrawled that day. The Carters was the last. 9:13 p.m. T and E. Carter, full tank, westbound. Below it, a faint notation written later in a different pen. Returned after hours. Marian stared at the words. The pen stroke wavered, trailing off mid-letter. She turned the page. The next entry was blank, except for a faint brown smear that might have been water or something darker. A sound came from the back room. A board shifting, maybe wind. She called out, "Hello?" The silence that followed was thick and patient. She walked toward the noise. Flashlight beam cutting across rusted tools and cans of paint hardened to stone. Then, at the far end of the counter, something caught the light. A photo frame face down beneath a layer of grime. She lifted it carefully. Inside was a Polaroid of 3 men standing beside a truck. One was clearly Samuel Yates, thin, stooped, with a cigarette between fingers. The second man's face was obscured by glare. The third is Thomas Carter, unmistakable. But it wasn't the faces that froze her. It was the date printed in the white border below, June 15, 1964, 2:06 a.m. Almost 4 hours after the Carters were supposed to have vanished. Her pulse quickened. Behind her, the wind pushed through a broken window, making a calendar flap against the wall. It was turned to June, the edges scorched. She stepped closer. The days after the 14th had been crossed out in thick black ink. She backed away slowly, took one last look at the photograph, and slipped it into her pocket. By the time she reached her car, the light had shifted. The sun bled through clouds, staining everything amber. On the seat beside her, the rusted key glinted, as if remembering. She drove straight to the county records office, ignoring the posted hours. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over rows of filing cabinets. The clerk, young and curious, raised an eyebrow. "You again?" "I need personnel files," Marian said. "Sheriff's Department, 1960 through 1970. Especially anyone connected to Samuel Yates." He frowned, but led her to the back. Not much left from those years. Flood took out half the basement. They found one surviving drawer marked personnel retired and deceased. Inside, the folders were swollen with humidity. She flipped until she found Yates. The file was thin. One photo, a discharge note, and a single-page memo stamped confidential. The memo was dated June 20, 1964. It read, "Suspended indefinitely pending inquiry. Refused to cooperate with the investigation into missing persons. Declined interview. Location unknown. No record of reinstatement. No follow-up. Just a scrawled initial in the corner W.H. Marian closed the file. "Walter Haynes," she said quietly. The clerk looked puzzled. "Who?" "The sheriff who signed the Carter disappearance report." She slid the file back and turned to leave. "You still have his address?" "Retired ages ago," the clerk said. "Lives out near the Quarry Road, if he's even alive." She nodded. "Thank you." Outside, the air felt heavier. the light dimmer. She got in her car, started the engine, and sat for a long moment with her hands on the wheel. The pieces were lining up, but not in any order that made sense yet. On the seat beside her, the key glinted again, catching a stray sunbeam as though it wanted her attention. She picked it up and turned it over in her palm. The back was engraved faintly with another mark she hadn't noticed before. A set of initials not belonging to either Carter, but with the initials S.Y. Her reflection in the windshield looked older and more tired than she remembered. "What did you do, Sam?" she whispered. The woods was waiting for her answer. By the time Marian reached the quarry road, the sky had turned the color of pewter, and the smell of rain moved through the trees ahead of it. The road climbed in slow, uneasy turns, until it leveled at a cluster of mailboxes clinging to the edge of the gravel. One of them still bore a name scratched into rust: Haynes. She turned into the drive, tires crunching over wet stones. The house that appeared beyond the bend was more cabin than home, with cedar siding grayed with age and a single porch light flickering like it was arguing with the wind. She parked and stepped out, the air heavy with electricity and pine. A dog barked once from somewhere inside before falling silent. When the door opened, Walter Haynes filled the frame. Thin and white-haired, his face collapsed inward, like a man who'd been holding his breath for decades. His eyes, though, were still sharp. He took one look at the badge in her hand and shook his head. "You're late by about 30 years. I'm not here to arrest you," Marian said. "Then you're here to stir ghosts." "Maybe they need stirring." He hesitated, then pushed the screen door wider. "Come in before the rain starts. I don't like yelling over thunder." Inside, the house smelled of coffee grounds and old wood. Papers were stacked on the table, some yellowed, others new. He motioned toward a chair. "You're from the state?" "Freelance," she said. "Cold cases." He smirked. "No such thing as cold, just forgotten." She laid the photograph from the gas station on the table. "You recognize this?" His hand twitched before he reached for it. "That's Yates. And Thomas Carter." "Damn." He stared longer than he needed to. "Where'd you get this?" "From what's left of Yates's station. It was taken 2 hours after the Carters supposedly disappeared." Haynes set the photo down carefully. "You shouldn't be digging around out there." "I'm not the first to say that today." He rubbed the bridge of his nose, eyes closing like the weight of memory pressed from the inside. "Yates came to me the night they vanished. He said he'd seen their car break down, offered them a ride back into town. I didn't think much of it until he stopped showing up for shifts. Then the rumors started." "Did you investigate?" "I tried," he said. "The county didn't have the budget or the will. People wanted the story buried before it got ugly. So we wrote a report, stamped it closed, and everyone went back to pretending the woods were harmless." Marian's voice stayed low. "You filed a confidential note about Yates, refused to cooperate, location unknown." He gave a dry laugh. "That's one way to say he disappeared. The cabin burned down 3 days after I suspended him. The body was never found. The whole thing stank, but by then I was told to let it lie." "Told by who?" His eyes moved toward the window, where the trees swayed darkly. "County board. The mill was the biggest employer around. Half the deputies had kin there. Money flowed both directions. You start pointing fingers, and the whole town cracks open." She leaned forward. "And the Carters?" He looked at her then, and something like guilt flickered across his face. "I think Yates took them out past the ridge. There's an old logging trail that dead ends near the creek. I went looking once. Found tire tracks that didn't belong to any patrol car. But I also found something else." He rose slowly, crossed to a cabinet, and pulled out a tin box. Inside, beneath old letters, lay a folded sheet of paper gone soft with time. He handed it to her. Marian unfolded it carefully. It was a hand-drawn map. A creek, a bend in the road, and a crude X marked under the words, "Crate, buried here." Her pulse jumped. "You marked this?" "No. That's Yates's handwriting." The rain started then, sudden and hard. It hit the roof like gravel. Haynes sank back into his chair. He left that in my office after the fire. No one ever asked for it back. I couldn't throw it away. Did you ever look? He shook his head. Some truths don't want to be dug up. Marian studied the map. The coordinates roughly matched the area where the crate had surfaced 30 years later. He buried evidence, she said quietly. And maybe his confession. Haynes nodded. Or his guilt? Lightning flashed through the window, whitening the room. When it faded, Haynes' face looked even smaller, as if the years were folding over him. If you go back there, don't go alone. Why? Because the men who built that mill are still around. They paid good money to keep this story dead. Yates might have done the burying, but he didn't do the killing. Thunder rolled. Marian folded the map and slipped it into her jacket. Thank you for your time. He didn't move to stop her. You dig up old ghosts. They tend to follow you home, he said. Outside, the rain softened to a drizzle. The air smelled of wet pine and engine oil. Marian sat in her car for a long minute, the map open on her lap, raindrops tapping on the windshield like impatient fingers. The coordinates matched almost exactly the creek bank where the crate had been found. But there was a second mark, another X farther upriver, under a note that read simply, Second Sight. She turned the key in the ignition. The engine caught, headlights cutting through the mist. The tires threw mud as she reversed down the drive. When she reached the road, she looked back once. Haynes stood on the porch, his figure framed by the doorway, a single yellow light flickering behind him. By the time she reached the main road, the rain had stopped, but the clouds hung low, bruised and heavy. She drove until the first mile marker appeared, faded white numbers on a rusted plate. She pulled over, unrolled the map again, and traced the line of the creek. If Yates had hidden one crate, what had he buried in the second place? The thought stuck with her, all the way back to town. At the motel, she spread the map on the bedspread beside her notes. The radio on the nightstand hissed with static until a voice broke through, faint but clear. Marian Holt? She froze. Who is this? No answer. Just a crackle, and then, you found the first box. Leave the rest buried. Then the line went dead. Marian stared at the radio, the silence behind it as thick as the forest itself. She switched it off, grabbed her recorder, and began dictating into it, out of habit, her voice low but steady. June 19th. Walter Haynes confirms Samuel Yates knew the Carters. Map recovered. Evidence suggests a second burial site upriver. Possible connection to mill owners. Phone interference noted. Unknown source. She clicked the recorder off. The clock read 2:17 a.m. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the smell of wet cedar through the cracked window. She lay back on the bed, eyes open in the dark, replaying Haynes' last words. He didn't do the killing. Morning would bring another drive, another trail, and maybe the second crate. But for now, only the rain spoke, and it said the woods weren't finished. The sun hadn't yet burned through the fog when Marian reached the creek again. A thin veil of mist drifted over the valley, turning the air into something you could almost wade through. Her boots sank into the mud near the bend marked on the map. She killed the engine, left the door open, and listened for a long minute before moving. The woods were still except for the trickle of water against stone. She followed the map's faint lines until she reached the clearing Yates had drawn. The place didn't feel random. It had geometry. The trees were too evenly spaced, the ground oddly level, and the undergrowth stunted, as if the soil remembered what lay beneath it. The smell of earth was heavy and damp, mixed with the faint sweetness of decay. Marian knelt, unzipped her pack, and took out a trowel and small brush. The rain from the night before had softened the top layer of soil. She scraped gently, clearing away moss and dead leaves. Within minutes, she found something unnatural, a rectangle of compacted clay, a faint seam. She brushed until metal glinted, a hinge, then another. The second crate was smaller, built from the same kind of wood as the first, but water had chewed at its edges. She worked her fingers under the lip and pulled. The lid gave a reluctant sigh, as though exhaling a memory. Inside, wrapped in plastic and tar paper, were three objects: a stack of photographs bound with string, a small envelope labeled C, and a revolver coated in rust. She unwrapped the photos first. The top image was a blurred landscape of trees, a flash, and motion. The second, clearer, two men near a pickup, their faces half hidden by shadow. The third, a woman lying on the ground beside the creek, eyes closed, one arm bent beneath her, hair fanned across the leaves. Evelyn Carter. Marian swallowed hard. She flipped the photo over. On the back, written in a thin, trembling hand, June 15, 1964. They said it would look like an accident. Her hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, folded twice. She unfolded it carefully, expecting a confession. Instead, the words sprawled unevenly. The ink bled by years of damp. To whoever finds this, it wasn't supposed to happen. They told me to scare them, to make them leave. They were digging where they shouldn't. But she ran. He followed. The creek took them both. I buried what I could, so they'd have peace. The rest they kept. Forgive me. S.Y. Marian sat back in the mud, the sound of the creek suddenly louder. The revolver gleamed dully beside her, the cylinder half open. She lifted it carefully. 2 rounds fired, 4 remaining. She checked the handle engraved with the initials W.H. Her pulse stuttered. Walter Haynes. She looked toward the ridge beyond the creek where the trees thickened. The sheriff had been younger then, ambitious, and desperate to keep the mill's reputation clean. He'd told her the county had ordered him to let it go. Maybe he hadn't told her everything. Marian packed the items carefully into evidence bags, sealed them, and started back toward the car. Halfway up the trail, something cracked in the brush behind her. She stopped. The sound wasn't animal. It was too measured, too human. She turned slowly, hand hovering near her jacket pocket. Who's there? No answer. Only the creak of branches shifting. She took a step backward, eyes scanning the tree line. Another sound, this time closer. A glint of movement, the outline of a figure between the trees. Then a voice, low and calm. You shouldn't have come here, Miss Holt. Her breath caught. Who are you? The figure stepped out of the shadow. He was older, heavy-set, with a raincoat buttoned to the neck. His face was familiar in a way she couldn't place. A friend of the sheriff's, he said. And someone who still believes in leaving the past buried. Walter sent you? The man smiled faintly. Walter doesn't send anyone anymore. He moved a step closer. She raised the revolver, keeping her hand steady. You'd better stop right there. The smile faded. That's his gun, isn't it? I see you've done your homework. He kept his voice even, but the air around them seemed to tighten. Marian's pulse hammered. Tell me what happened to the Carters. You already know, he said. They were in the wrong place. They heard the wrong promise. She tried to run, and the creek took her. He didn't want to leave without her. Yates buried them? He shook his head slowly. Yates buried his guilt. We buried the truth. Lightning flashed beyond the ridge, distant but clear. Marian didn't lower the gun. Who's we? The man looked almost sad. The ones who built this town. The ones who made sure the mill stayed open. People like me, who did what they were told. He took another step. Put the gun down, Miss Holt. You've already found enough. She steadied her breath. No, not yet. He stopped, eyes narrowing. Careful. Curiosity can get you buried in these woods too. Before she could answer, thunder cracked so loud, it felt like the ground shifted. The man flinched, and in that heartbeat, she bolted, turned, and sprinted up the slope toward the car. Branches clawed at her arms, rain exploding through the canopy. Behind her, footsteps followed, heavy, gaining ground. She stumbled onto the road, threw open the driver's door, and slammed it shut just as the figure broke from the trees. The car fishtailed on wet gravel before catching traction. In the rearview mirror, the man stood at the edge of the road, rain streaming off his coat, face pale and expressionless. She drove until the trees gave way to open fields, heart pounding, the revolver clutched on the seat beside her. At the next junction, she pulled over beneath a flickering gas station light. Her hands trembled as she replayed his words. "We buried the truth." She called the state office from the payphone, gave the coordinates, and waited through the static. The dispatcher promised to send a team by morning. "Be careful out there," he added. "That ridge floods fast when it rains." She hung up, leaned against the glass, and looked out at the black ribbon of road stretching back toward the forest. In the distance, lightning flickered again, faint and colorless. The tape recorder in her passenger seat clicked softly, as if something inside it shifted on its own. She turned toward it, pulse rising, but the sound faded. Only the wind remained. When she finally checked into another motel, the woman at the front desk looked up from her ledger. "Storm coming," she said. "Best stay off the back roads." Marian nodded. "I'll try," but she knew she wouldn't. She had to see what else the creek was keeping. Before sleeping, she wrote one note in her journal. Evelyn's body confirmed in photos. Thomas is likely nearby. Haynes compromised. Unknown male connection to Mill. Must return at dawn. She left the revolver on the nightstand beside the map, rain tapping on the window like a warning. Outside, somewhere in the darkness, a single porch light flickered, the kind that waits for someone who isn't coming home. By dawn, the sky had turned a bruised gray. Marian pulled into the service road near the creek just as two unmarked sedans and a county truck rolled in behind her. The men who stepped out wore plain windbreakers, their breath visible in the cold. They weren't state police. She could tell by the way they didn't introduce themselves. They moved with quiet efficiency, setting up tarps, marking coordinates, and unloading shovels. One of them, a younger man with mud already up to his ankles, walked over. "You're Holt?" She nodded. "We'll take it from here." "No," she said, keeping her voice steady. "You'll assist. That site isn't processed yet, and the chain of custody's already a mess." He didn't argue, just looked at her for a beat longer than necessary. "Fine, but we do it fast. Rain's coming." They hiked down to the creek, the same bend where she'd found the second crate. The soil glistened, heavy and dark. One man began probing with a steel rod, moving methodically. Marian stood at the edge, map in hand. The air smelled faintly of iron and wet bark. The rod struck something solid. A dull thud. Then again. "Here," the man called. They began to dig, shovels sliding into mud with wet sucking sounds. Within minutes, the shape of a wooden box emerged. A long, narrow trunk bound with corroded wire. The men cleared around it carefully. One crouched beside the latch, pried gently, then glanced at her. "You want the honors?" Marian shook her head. "Go ahead." The lid opened with a slow groan. The smell that escaped was old water, earth, and something faintly chemical. Inside lay a layer of burlap. Beneath that bone, the skeleton was curled, one arm bent across the chest, remnants of fabric still clinging to the ribs. Near the skull, a metal badge glinted dully, half buried in silt. Marian knelt, brushing the mud away with gloved fingers. It was a belt buckle engraved with TC. Her throat tightened. "Thomas Carter," she whispered. The younger man straightened. "We'll need the coroner." But Marian barely heard him. Her eyes caught something else at the bottom of the box paper, sealed in wax. She reached for it carefully and peeled back the coating. Inside were several folded pages. The ink faded but legible. The first line made her stomach clench. "To Sheriff Haynes, if you're reading this, it means you finished what I couldn't." The handwriting was unmistakable. "Samuel Yates." She read on. The words halting. "Confessional. I took them from the road because you said it was right. The company needed quiet. The girl begged me to take her home. I told her it wasn't my call. When she ran, I fired to scare her. The bullet caught her shoulder, and she fell. He came for her, tried to pull her out, but the creek took them both. You told me to bury them and say nothing. I did. But the water keeps talking. I can't sleep for the sound of it. If there's any mercy, give them a name again. The woods deserve peace. Marian folded the letter back into its plastic sleeve. Her hands trembled. The men around her worked in silence, documenting and photographing. One of them murmured, "Looks like a single wound through the upper arm. Matches the story." She rose, mud caked to her boots. "No story matches this." The gender and cross-seasoned. By mid-afternoon, the coroner's van had arrived. The remains were lifted carefully into a black bag, tagged and carried up the hill. Rain began to fall again, soft and steady. Marian stood under the pines, watching them disappear up the trail. The younger agent approached. "We'll catalog everything at the lab. You'll get copies of the report." "Who sent you?" she asked. He hesitated. "You don't need to know that. Try me." He sighed. "Call it joint jurisdiction. The mill was federally contracted back then. Certain people don't want attention." She almost laughed. 30 years too late for that." He started back toward the cars. Sometimes late is still too soon. When the last vehicle left, she stayed by the creek, alone with the sound of water and the faint hiss of rain on leaves. She looked down at the spot where the crate had been, where the earth was now hollowed and dark. She crouched and pressed a hand against the wet ground. "Evelyn," she said softly, "he's found now. Both of you are." Thunder rumbled far off, low and reluctant. She walked back toward her car. But halfway up the trail, movement caught her eye. A figure standing across the water, near the opposite bank. Too far to see clearly, but the shape was unmistakable. Tall, still, watching. She froze. "Hello?" The figure didn't move. Then lightning flashed, and for an instant the rain lit him up. A man in a dark coat, collar turned high, eyes hidden. When the light faded, he was gone. Marian stood there for a long time, listening. The forest was empty again. Back at the motel that night, she laid the recovered letter on the table beside the revolver. The rain on the window matched the sound of the creek. She recorded her notes in a whisper. Day 4. Human remains recovered. Identification likely Thomas Carter. The letter confirms homicide and cover-up. Mentions direct involvement from Sheriff Walter Haynes. Unknown oversight connection to mill. Presence of an unidentified observer at the site. Possible threat. She stopped the tape, rewound, and played back her own voice, steady and detached. She hated that tone. It sounded like someone else's story. When she turned off the recorder, she noticed the revolver's hammer was cocked halfway back. She hadn't touched it since the morning. Her hands went still. She placed the weapon flat on the table and pressed her palm against the grip until the metal's chill settled into her skin. The motel neon outside blinked through the curtains, painting the wall red, then dark, then red again. Somewhere between the flickers, she realized what came next. The map had 2 sites marked, but Yates' letter described 3 people involved. Himself, Haynes, and the one who gave the order. The man in the woods, the one who told her to leave it buried, wasn't a ghost. He was the third. She pulled the map from her bag and traced the creek north until it intersected the old mill road. There, near the edge of the property, was a faint pencil mark she hadn't noticed before. A circle, barely visible. She turned the revolver toward the light. On the inside of the grip, beneath the grime, something glimmered. Letters carved crudely into the wood. C.H. Not Walter Haynes. Someone else. She flipped through her notes, scanning the old mill ownership list. The name leapt out. Charles Harrow, chairman of Harrow Lumber. The same man who had funded the sheriff's election, who'd built half the town's payroll on the mill's back. Marian closed her notebook. "So it was you," she said softly. Outside, the rain thickened. She drew the curtains, packed the gun and map, and sat for a moment in the chair by the window, listening to the wind press against the glass. The phone rang once. She didn't move. It rang again. She lifted the receiver slowly. A man's voice, calm, steady. "You found him, then." Her pulse jumped. "Who is this?" A pause. Then, "You're standing where you shouldn't be, Miss Holt. The woods have long memories." Click. The line went dead. She held the receiver a moment longer before setting it down. The storm outside rose, thunder rolling across the valley. She reached for her tape recorder, pressed the red button, and spoke into it quietly, as if someone else might one day listen. "If something happens to me, start at the mill. Everything begins there." Then she turned off the light. By morning, the rain had thinned to mist, and the world felt rinsed clean, though Marian knew better. The air outside the motel still held the sour smell of rust and pine sap. She loaded her gear into the car without breakfast and turned the key. The engine stuttered, then caught, headlights slicing the fog as she pulled onto the two-lane road that led toward the mill. The highway unfurled empty for miles, a gray ribbon through the pines. Telephone wires sagged between poles, black against a bruised sky. Every few miles she passed another boarded house, another sign of a town that had outlived its reason. The mill's smokestack appeared first, tall, broken at the crown, leaning like an exhausted monument. She turned down the access road. Gravel hissed under the tires. The buildings appeared out of the fog one by one. A warehouse with its roof caved in, an office with glass punched out, and rusting machines asleep beneath tarps and vines. Marian parked beside the loading dock and stepped out. The air was colder here, as though the place still breathed. She took her flashlight and recorder. Her footsteps echoed on the warped planks as she crossed into the main floor. Inside was a cathedral of ruin. Shafts of gray light cut through holes in the roof, revealing floating dust. The smell was wood rot and oil. Paper drifted along the floor. Old invoices, safety forms, and payroll ledgers. She picked one up and scanned the faded print. The name at the bottom corner stopped her. C. Harrow. She turned slowly, sweeping her light across the far wall. There was a staircase there, narrow, leading down into shadow. A sign hung crookedly above it. Supervisor's records. She descended. The air grew damp, the smell of mold thickening. At the bottom, she found a door half open, hinges shrieking when she pushed. Her beam fell on a small office, intact except for dust. A desk sat against the wall, papers scattered like leaves. She began to photograph everything. In a drawer, she found a ledger bound in cracked leather, dated from 1963 to 1966. The entries were written in two hands, in neat cursive in black ink, with later additions in red pencil. She flipped to June 1964. The line there read, "Payment rendered. C. Harrow, Yates, Haynes. Debt resolved, silence insured." The same phrasing from the sheriff's ledger she'd glimpsed weeks ago in the archives. She whispered the words out loud, the sound barely more than breath. Debt resolved, silence insured. From somewhere above, a board creaked. She froze. The noise came again, slow and deliberate. Someone was moving on the floor above. Marian turned off the flashlight. Darkness folded over her like cloth. She waited, listening. A faint metallic scrape followed, the sound of something dragged across concrete. She eased toward the doorway, every step measured. The stairwell gaped ahead, a vertical strip of gray light from above. She climbed halfway before stopping. Another creak, closer now. At the top, a silhouette passed through the haze. A man, tall, shoulders squared. She couldn't see his face. He paused at the edge of the balcony, peering down as though he could sense her below. Marian held her breath. The man turned and vanished into the far corridor. She waited until the silence returned, then climbed the rest of the way, flashlight still off. The hallway smelled of rain and dust. She reached the outer door and stepped into the open again. The fog had thickened, swallowing the tree line. Her car sat 30 yards away, windows beaded with moisture. No sign of movement. She moved quickly, glancing back once before opening the driver's door. The passenger seat wasn't empty. A file folder sat there, perfectly dry. Her name was scrawled across the top. She looked around. Nothing but mist. She opened the folder. Inside were 3 black and white photographs. The Carters smiling outside a diner. A blurred image of a man in uniform, Sheriff Haynes, shaking hands with another man whose face was turned away. And the third photo, grainier, showing a woman tied to a chair in a dim room. Evelyn, scrawled beneath in ink, "You're repeating her mistake." Marian's stomach dropped. She scanned the tree line again, heart hammering. The fog seemed to move, but nothing stepped out. She slid the photos back into the folder, locked it in the glove box, and drove back on the highway. Her phone buzzed once. A message, "Stop digging, or you'll join them." She threw the phone onto the seat and kept driving. By the time she reached town, the clouds were breaking. A weak sun pushed through. She pulled into the sheriff's office. The building looked the same as it had when she'd first walked in. 2 stories of brick and silence. She climbed the steps, carrying the ledger and the photographs. The clerk at the front desk looked up. "Detective Holt?" She didn't correct the title. "I need to see Sheriff Haynes." The clerk's smile flickered. "He's not here. When will he be?" The woman hesitated. "He won't. Sheriff Haynes passed last night. Heart failure." The words hung in the air, like smoke. Marian's mouth went dry. "Who found him?" "Deputies. He'd been sick a while." She nodded slowly and stepped back from the counter. "Heart failure. The timing is too neat." Outside, the light had sharpened into afternoon. She walked down the block to a diner, the kind that still smelled of coffee and fryer oil. She slid into a booth near the window and ordered nothing. Her reflection in the glass looked foreign, pale, and older. She pulled the ledger from her bag and laid it open to the June entry again. Harrow's name underlined. She flipped through the pages, searching for more. The last entry was dated October 1964. Shipment complete. Contract closed. Personal oversight. CH. She traced the initials with her finger, the revolver's handle, the crate. Everything pointed back to him. Charles Harrow had died in 1975, according to county records, but his company hadn't. Harrow Timber still existed, operating quietly under a new board. She scribbled the current address of an office outside Austin. As she packed up, the waitress slid a refill across the table. "Long day?" Marian managed a smile. "Long 40 years." When she left the diner, the sun was setting behind the ridge, washing the town in the color of rust. She drove west until the hills opened into flat country. The highway stretched straight and empty. The Harrow Timber office stood behind a chain-link fence, half its windows boarded. The sign out front was faded but legible. She parked, climbed through a gap in the fence, and crossed the gravel yard. The front door was unlocked. Inside smelled of stale air and paper. She found the reception desk, dust thick on the counter. Behind it, a corkboard covered in photographs of mill workers, trucks, and shipments. In the corner, a portrait of Charles Harrow in his prime, jaw firm, eyes cold. She turned toward the hallway and froze. A single light burned at the end, under a door marked Archives. She moved toward it, each step quiet. The door creaked open. Inside, metal filing cabinets lined the walls. The room hummed with faint electricity. The building wasn't dead after all. On the central table sat an open binder, pages covered in typed entries. She leaned closer. Project lists, payments, and one heading circled in pencil, Special Asset, June 1964. Her eyes traced the first line. Transfer of property confirmed. 2 subjects removed. Compensation processed. A chill ran through her. The Carters weren't random victims. They were in the way of something bigger. A land purchase. A boundary dispute. Something that had fed an empire. Behind her, a floorboard snapped. She turned. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the hallway light. "You just couldn't leave it," the voice said. Male, older, rough. "Who are you?" she asked. He stepped forward, and she saw his face for the first time. Lined, gray-haired, but unmistakable. The man from the woods. "Charles Harrow," she breathed. He smiled faintly. "My father built this place. I'll keep it quiet. You sent the messages. I warned you. But you people always mistake warnings for threats. You killed the Carters." His expression didn't change. "No, I made them disappear. My father ordered it. They were going to expose something that would have closed the mill and taken this town with it. I kept order. Even Haynes understood that. Haynes is dead." Harrow nodded slowly. "So are most of the ones who mattered. Except me." Marian took a step closer. "And what happens now?" He looked at her with something almost like pity. "Now, you walk away. You've got your answers. Let the past stay buried." "Not this time," he sighed. "Then you'll join them." Lightning flashed outside, the windows pulsing white. The thunder came a beat later, rolling through the hollow building. Marian's hand slipped inside her coat, fingers finding the cold grip of the revolver. "I'm not afraid of ghosts," she said. Harrow smiled. "Good. Because you're about to meet them." The lights went out. The room plunged into darkness, and somewhere in it, a gun clicked. The blackout swallowed everything. 1 second Marian saw Harrow's silhouette. The next, she was inside a void that smelled of dust and electricity. The hum of old wiring died. Only the rain outside whispered against the roof. She didn't move. Her heartbeat filled the silence, loud in her ears. Somewhere in the dark, a floorboard creaked. She eased sideways, one hand against the filing cabinets, the other wrapped tight around the revolver. Metal drawers brushed her sleeve. She stopped breathing. The sound came again, closer this time. Then, the slow rasp of a match being struck. A flame flickered across the room, reflected in Harrow's glasses. He stood near the table, arms steady, match held like a fuse. "You shouldn't have come alone," he said. Her voice came out low. "Neither should you." She fired once. The flash lit the office for an instant. Harrow lunged sideways. The bullet shattered a cabinet. Papers rained to the floor like snow. The match went out. Now only the smell of gunpowder and the ring in her ears. She dropped low, crawled toward the opposite wall, hand brushing cold concrete. He fired back. The blast deafening, close enough that she felt air move past her cheek. "Leave it, Marian," he called. "There's nothing left here but ghosts." She answered with silence, sliding along the floor toward where she'd seen the exit. Her hand brushed something, an unplugged lamp, its cord frayed. She lifted it and hurled it toward the sound of his voice. It crashed, glass scattering, a curse, movement. She rose, aimed, and fired again. The muzzle flash revealed him half-crouched behind the table, blood bright on his sleeve. He ducked. "You don't know what you're protecting," she said. "I know exactly what I'm protecting. Legacy. Order. The town would have died without us. You killed 2 people for a ledger." He laughed, a raw, rasping sound. "For a town, for families, for everything you reporters love to pretend you care about." Rain hammered harder, seeping through cracks in the roof. Water pooled across the floor, shining faintly in the next lightning flash. She moved again, carefully, staying low. Then another sound, a faint mechanical whine. She froze. The generator. Somewhere behind the wall, it coughed and caught, and the emergency lights flickered to life. Pale red bulbs bathed the room, turning dust into smoke. She saw him clearly now, one arm bleeding, gun still in his other hand. The table between them was scattered with files and envelopes, stamped confidential. "Put it down," she said. "You'll burn it all anyway." "Then let it burn." For a second, neither moved. Then his hand twitched. She was fired. The impact spun him backward into the shelves. The gun clattered away, sliding across the floor toward her boots. He slumped, breathing raggedly. Marian kept her revolver up as she crossed the room. His eyes followed her, pale and wet. "Tell me why," she said. He coughed, red flecking his lip. "Because they saw the books. They knew what the land was worth and what we'd done to get it. The company didn't kill them. I did. Clean, quick, before they ruined everything. You buried them. I buried my father's sins." Lightning flared through a broken pane, and in that moment, she saw something gleam on the table. A steel lockbox, its lid ajar. Inside lay a smaller ledger, leather cracked, marked 1964. She lifted it, ignoring the sting of dust. The pages were brittle, typed in faint ink. Transaction columns ran down each side. The last page stopped her cold. June 18. Compensation to Sheriff Haynes, $4,000. June 18. Compensation to S. Yates, $2,000. June 18. Reclamation parcel, Carter Homestead. Reclamation. They hadn't just been silenced. They'd been erased from their own land. Harrow groaned, shifting. "Now you know. It's all in there. Every name, every payment." She closed the ledger. "Then that's what I'll show them. You won't leave this building alive." He tried to rise, but his leg buckled. The gunfire had drained what was left of him. He sagged back, eyes hollow. "You think they'll believe you? You think it matters?" She stepped closer. "It always matters." He laughed once, weakly but sharply. "You sound like Evelyn." Her grip tightened on the ledger. She was right. He smiled faintly, breath rattling. So was I. Then his eyes rolled back, his head hitting the wall with a dull thud. The red lights flickered once, twice, then died. Marian stood in the dark, the sound of the rain swelling into thunder. She holstered the revolver, clutched the ledger to her chest, and found her way to the hall by memory. The storm outside roared like applause as she stepped into it. Her car waited beyond the fence. She slid behind the wheel, the engine catching on the first try. As she pulled onto the road, she looked once in the rearview mirror. The mill loomed behind her, a black silhouette against flashes of lightning. Halfway down the highway, a shape appeared in the distance. Blue lights, sheriff's vehicles. She slowed and flagged them down. 2 deputies stepped out, rain jackets slick, weapons at their hips. "Ma'am?" She held up her press ID. "You'll want to send units to the old Harrow Mill." Shots fired. 1 suspect down. They exchanged glances. "Who?" "Charles Harrow." The younger deputy frowned. "He's been dead for decades." Marian exhaled, the sound close to a laugh. "Then you'll find a ghost with a bullet in his chest." They hesitated before turning toward the radios, murmuring into static. She drove on. At the next town, she pulled into a 24-hour diner. It looked almost identical to the one in the old photographs. Neon buzz, empty booths, and a waitress cleaning counters with the slow rhythm of habit. Marian sat at the end booth, laid the ledger on the table, and ordered coffee. The waitress poured it without asking questions. "Long night? Long lifetime," Marian said. The woman smiled politely and drifted away. Marian opened the ledger again. Mud still crusted its edges. Each page was a ghost. Sheriff Haynes' name repeated through the years, amounts rising. Notes in the margin. Transport arranged. Witness relocated. By 1966, the handwriting had changed to be more angular and more deliberate. Harrow's. Her phone buzzed. An email notification from the state office. Automatic backup complete. Audio files uploaded. She blinked. She hadn't turned on the recorder since the motel. She scrolled. The last timestamp was from 30 minutes ago, while she'd been at the mill. She opened it. Her own voice came first, breathless. "You killed them for a ledger." Then Harrow's response, perfectly clear. "I made them disappear. My father ordered it." She sat back, the phone trembling in her hand. Somewhere during the chaos, her recorder had captured everything. Outside, the rain eased to a whisper. The horizon lightened as dawn pressed through clouds. Marian finished her coffee, slid the ledger and recorder into her bag, and paid in cash. As she reached the door, The waitress called after her. "Hey, miss." Marian turned. "You dropped this." The woman held up a small object, something metal and worn. Marian frowned. It wasn't hers. The waitress placed it in her palm. A key, stamped on the side. Storage 3. B County evidence. Marian looked up sharply. "Where did you get this?" The waitress shrugged. "Found it under your booth. Must have fallen from your bag." But Marian hadn't opened her bag. She walked outside, the key heavy in her hand. The sun was finally rising behind the hills, turning the wet road gold. She pocketed the key, slid into her car, and started the engine. If there was a third storage locker, it meant there was more evidence Haynes or Harrow had hidden before the end. And maybe, finally, a record of Evelyn herself. She pulled onto the highway again, the first rays of light spilling over the trees. Behind her, the diner's neon sign flickered once and went dark. Ahead, the road bent toward the county courthouse. Some ghosts, she thought, aren't finished until they're named. The courthouse looked different in ordinary daylight, even peaceful. But Marian had learned that peace was often just a shell. She parked on the east side, where the asphalt was cracked and moss grew between the lines, and sat for a moment with the key in her palm. Storage 3. B County evidence. The metal was cold and old enough that the edges had worn smooth. She turned it between her fingers like it might whisper where to go. Inside, the courthouse smelled of wax and paper. The air was heavy with quiet, the kind of silence that comes from too many closed doors. A clerk at the front desk barely looked up as Marian passed. Down the hall, an elevator waited with its doors open as if expecting her. She stepped in, pressed B, and watched the numbers count down. The basement was colder. Fluorescent lights buzzed weakly overhead, and the walls were lined with gray metal lockers, each marked with a stenciled number. 1 ampere, 1B, 2 amperes, 2B. She followed the sequence until she found it at 3B at the far end, half hidden behind a stack of filing boxes. The padlock was old, but the key slid in perfectly. The latch popped with a dull click. She pulled the door open. Inside was a single wooden crate, the kind used for shipping evidence decades ago, bound with tape that had turned yellow. Across the top, someone had written in marker, 1964 Carters. Her throat tightened. She set her bag down, peeled the tape back, and lifted the lid. Inside were 3 items: a small reel-to-reel tape recorder, a stack of photographs sealed in plastic, and a paper envelope labeled Statement. She lifted the recorder first. It was heavy and gray, the kind used by sheriffs for interviews. The reel was still loaded with tape. On the side, faded lettering, property of Haynes County Sheriff's Office. She found an outlet on the wall and plugged it in. The machine whirred to life, tape humming softly. Then a man's voice, low and careful. "This is Sheriff Walter Haynes. Date, June 19th, 1964. Subject, Evelyn Carter." A pause. Then a woman's voice, trembling. "Please, I already told you we were driving home, and the car stalled. That man, Yates, said he'd take us to the mill for help." Haynes interrupted. "You understand the gravity of what you're accusing, Mrs. Carter. These are respected men." Her breathing quickened. "I don't care who they are. I saw what they were loading onto those trucks. I saw the crates. He told me to keep quiet." "Did your husband see?" "Yes." "What happened then?" A long silence. When she finally spoke, her voice broke. "He ran after them. I heard a gunshot." The tape hissed. Then Haynes again, voice harder now. "Mrs. Carter, you'll stay here tonight. For your safety. I want to go home." Another pause. Then the scrape of a chair. "We'll take care of that." The tape stopped. Marian's fingers hovered over the rewind button, but she couldn't make herself press it. The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. She unplugged the machine, sat back, and let the weight of it settle. Evelyn Carter had survived long enough to tell the truth, and Haynes had recorded it and then buried the evidence literally. Marian opened the envelope next. Inside was a single page of typed text, stamped confidential at the top. To Sheriff Haynes, per our discussion, Mrs. Carter's statement is to remain sealed until the company provides assurance that the transfer will proceed without interference. The board authorizes you to contain the situation. Remove assets if necessary. Maintain narrative. Couple presumed missing, vehicle unrecovered. C.H. Marian's chest felt tight. The letter was signed in full. Charles Harrow. She stared at the page until her vision blurred, then slid it into an evidence sleeve. The stack of photographs came next. She spread them on the table one by one. The Carters smiling in front of their house. Their car half submerged in the creek. 2 uniformed deputies standing beside it, rifles in hand. The last image froze her. A close-up of Evelyn's face. Eyes closed, hair matted with rain. Her mouth was slightly open, as if she had been about to speak. Footsteps echoed faintly somewhere down the corridor. Marian's head snapped up. She waited, but the sound faded. She packed the tape, the letter, and the photos into her bag, relocked the cabinet, and took the elevator back to the first floor. The clerk barely glanced at her as she passed. Outside, the day had brightened, the clouds thinning to silver. She sat in her car, recording her notes in a low voice. Evidence recovered from county archives. Audio confirms Evelyn Carter gave a statement, naming both Yates and Harrow. Letter signed by Harrow authorizing containment. Proof of organized cover-up. Sheriff's office complicit. She stopped the recorder. For the first time in days, she didn't feel anger or triumph, just a hollow quiet, like the story itself had been waiting for her to listen. When she looked up, a car idled 2 spaces down, a dark sedan with tinted windows. It hadn't been there when she arrived. She could see only the outline of a man behind the wheel, motionless, watching. She started her car and pulled out slowly, heart thudding. The sedan followed. She drove through town, past the gas station, past the diner, until she reached the old bridge where the creek curved under the road. She slowed and checked the mirror. The sedan stopped at the far end of the bridge, engine still running. Marian got out, bag over her shoulder, and stood by the railing. The water below glinted brown and restless. Across the bridge, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He wore a plain suit and a gray tie. He wasn't armed, at least not visibly. "Miss Holt," he called. His voice carried easily over the sound of water. "Who are you?" she asked. Someone cleaning up the last page of a long story. She didn't move. "You'll have to be more specific." He smiled thinly. "You have things that don't belong to you. They belong to the truth." "That's a dangerous word, Miss Holt. Truth gets people killed. Then maybe it should kill the right people for once." The smile faded. "You can't win this. The tape and the letter will never see daylight." "You're wrong," she said quietly. "They already have." His eyes flickered, confusion breaking his calm for the first time. "What do you mean?" "I sent everything before I left the courthouse. Digital copies, state records, national wire. By now, half the agencies in this state have it." He stepped closer, anger flashing now. "You shouldn't have done that." His deadlifter, "Neither should you." A truck approached behind her, engine rumbling on the bridge. The man hesitated, glancing toward the sound. Marian turned, swung open her car door, and slid inside. By the time she looked back, the sedan was gone. She drove until the road split, taking the turn that led toward the county line. Her pulse finally slowed, but her hands still trembled on the wheel. She knew this wasn't over. People like that didn't vanish. They receded and waited. At a small rest stop overlooking the valley, she pulled over and stepped out. The air smelled clean after the rain, and in the distance she could see the forest where it had all begun. Somewhere down there, the creek still whispered under the trees. She took out the recorder and spoke again, her voice steadier now. Evelyn Carter tried to tell the truth. They silenced her. The same men built this county on what they buried. But time doesn't keep secrets. It just delays them. The tape survives. The truth survives. She switched it off, leaned against the car, and watched the clouds break apart into light. The woods below shimmered in the morning sun, ordinary again. But she knew better. The land remembered. It always did. Tomorrow, the headlines would run. The investigation would open. There would be hearings, interviews, maybe even arrests. The names of the Carters would finally rise from the archives, no longer missing but known. She smiled faintly. "You're found," she whispered. The wind carried the words downhill, through the trees, and down to the water where the first crate had broken free all those years ago. And for a moment, just a heartbeat, it sounded like the land whispered back. By the next morning, the story had escaped her control. It was on the radio before sunrise and on every regional news site by noon. The headline carried the weight of decades. 1964 disappearance linked to county sheriff, business magnate in historic cover-up. Marian sat in the corner booth of a roadside cafe, watching the world catch up. The television above the counter replayed aerial shots of the old mill surrounded by crime scene tape. Commentators spoke in careful tones about systemic corruption and newly uncovered evidence. Her name flashed once at the bottom of the screen. Source: independent investigator M. Holt. The waitress refilled her coffee without asking. "You did all that?" she said quietly. Marian shook her head. The story did. Outside, rain had started again. Reporters would descend on the county now. Television vans, documentarians, and true crime podcasters smelling blood and history. She felt none of the satisfaction she should have, only the fatigue of someone who's finally reached the truth and found it heavier than imagined. Her phone vibrated nonstop with unknown numbers and voicemail alerts. A call from the state attorney's office, one from the Department of Justice, and another from a news network offering an interview. She ignored them all. Instead, she drove. The highway curved through the hills, past the mill road now barricaded with police tape and floodlights. She didn't stop. She drove another 10 miles to the cemetery, a place she'd only seen in photographs. Oakwood rested on a rise overlooking the town. Old stones leaned under the weight of moss, dates worn down to near silence. She parked by the gate and walked. The Carters' new headstones stood side by side. Simple granite markers. Thomas Carter, 1932, 1964. Evelyn Carter, 1935, FO 1964. Founded 1994. Never forgotten. Someone, maybe a local historian, maybe a stranger, had left wildflowers at the base. Marian knelt, brushing rainwater from the carved names. "It's over," she whispered. But the words didn't feel right. Not over, just done. A car pulled up behind hers. She turned, heart rising, but it was Marcus, the state investigator who'd first doubted her and then believed. He held an umbrella and an expression that was equal parts relief and exhaustion. "Thought I'd find you here," he said. "Reporters? Everywhere." The Attorney General's office called in the feds. They're reopening 5 other cases connected to Harrow Timber. She nodded, staring at the graves. "Haynes family, cooperating," Marcus said. "They claim he kept files. We're still sorting through them. Your audio recording made it impossible to deny." "And Harrow?" "They recovered the body," he said. "It's him. You stopped him, Marian." She shook her head. "I just opened the door. The ghosts did the rest." He didn't argue. "You know they'll want you to testify." "I figured." They stood in the drizzle for a while, the town quiet around them. From somewhere down the hill came the low hum of generators. Reporters setting up for evening broadcasts. "You could walk away now," Marcus said softly. "You've done more than anyone expected." Marian smiled faintly. "So did Evelyn. Didn't save her. She didn't have you." The words settled between them, simple and true. When he left, the rain had turned light again, barely more than mist. She stayed another hour, talking quietly to the stones as if they could hear. She told them about the ledger, the tape, and the waitress who'd handed her the key. She told them the world finally knew their names. Then she walked back to her car and drove into town. By dusk, the courthouse was surrounded by media. Lights flared, voices shouted, and microphones thrust toward anyone in a suit. Marian slipped inside through a side door, avoiding the crowd. Upstairs, the county archives had been sealed, with guards stationed at every hall. A young deputy recognized her and nodded silently as she passed. In the evidence room, boxes labeled 1964 divided by 1966 sat, stacked on rolling carts. Technicians cataloged them one by one, latex gloves snapping, the quiet rhythm of bureaucracy cleaning up history. On a table by the window lay the tape recorder she'd found in locker 3B. Someone had rewound it to the beginning, ready for chain of custody transfer. She pressed play. Evelyn's voice filled the small room again, calm this time, with no tremor. If anything happens, tell my family what I saw. Tell them we were right. Marian stopped the tape, tears stinging behind her eyes. They'll know, she whispered. When she left the building, the courthouse steps were packed with cameras. She kept her head down, but someone recognized her. Questions erupted. Did you know the Carters? Are there more tapes? Do you fear retaliation? She paused at the bottom step, looked at the crowd, and for the first time in weeks, didn't feel fear. Only clarity. You asked what I found, she said, her voice carrying over the rain and static of microphones. I found what was stolen. A name, a story, and a truth buried deeper than a body. You want the rest? It's in the files. Read them. She walked away before they could ask anything else. Later, back in her motel room, she sat on the bed staring at the ledger again. It would go into evidence soon, sealed behind government glass. She thought of all the people whose signatures filled its pages. Men long dead, some still alive, each convinced that silence could outlast guilt. The power flickered once, dimming the lights. The old neon sign outside buzzed, throwing red shadows across the wall. She picked up her recorder and pressed record. My name is Marian Holt. For 30 years, this story stayed buried because people decided memory was optional. But the land doesn't forget, and neither do I. If you're hearing this, keep going. Keep digging. Stories like this don't end. They echo. She clicked stop. Then, quietly, she packed her things. The revolver, the notebook, and the map, now torn and faded. The evidence would go to court. The world would move on. But she knew there would be another case, another story, hiding in some other corner of the country where a file had been stamped cold and left to rot. Before turning out the light, she looked once more at the two headstones framed in the window of her mind. Thomas and Evelyn Carter, the couple who never made it home but finally found their way back. The rain eased outside, replaced by the soft, rhythmic hum of cicadas. The world, for once, sounded like it was breathing again. A month later, the courthouse stood quiet again. The media had moved on to fresher scandals, and the rain that once drummed over the rooftops of Haines County now washed clean the yellow tape and tire tracks that scarred the fields. From the highway, the mill looked almost peaceful, its broken roof glinting under the autumn sun, vines curling up its sides like the earth, reclaiming what was taken. Marian parked on the gravel shoulder and stepped out. The air smelled of cedar and rust. Crickets sang under the tall grass. For the first time since this began, the woods felt still. She walked down the path toward the creek. The soil had been turned and leveled after the excavation. Wildflowers had begun to grow where the crates once lay. The sound of the water was soft, steady, and ordinary. She knelt by the edge, placed a small stone on the bank, and let her hand rest against the damp earth. Rest easy, she said quietly. You're home now. Her reflection wavered in the current. Older, thinner eyes lined with fatigue, but she smiled at it anyway. She'd lost count of how many nights she'd woken to the echo of Evelyn's recorded voice, how many times she'd dreamed of the crate splitting open beneath the trees. But now, standing here, There was no echo, only wind through leaves and the distant hum of an approaching truck. She turned toward the sound. A state vehicle crawled down the dirt road and stopped beside her car. Marcus stepped out, dressed in plain clothes, coffee thermos in hand. "Are you sure you're done with this one?" he asked. Marian shrugged. "I've learned to never say done. This sauté de planned." He smiled faintly. "They're naming a new community park after them. The Carters. The mayor wanted to invite you to the dedication." "I'll send flowers," she said. He nodded, eyes following the creek. "Do you ever think about what it cost? All this? Every day. And was it worth it?" Marian watched a leaf drift past her boot, carried away by the current. "Truth always is," she said. They stood in silence for a while. A hawk circled high above the tree line, its cry sharp against the quiet. "You'll be leaving town soon?" Marcus asked. "Tomorrow. There's another file waiting. A missing hiker in Idaho, 1998. Different woods, same silence." He chuckled softly. "You don't know how to stop." She smiled. "Neither does the truth." He finished his coffee, set the thermos on the hood, and offered his hand. "Good luck, Holt." "Take care of this place," she said, shaking it. "It's earned its peace." When his truck pulled away, she stayed a moment longer. The afternoon light was honey-colored now, filtering through the pines. She took one last look at the creek, then walked back to her car. The back seat was cluttered with notebooks and maps, with a new recorder waiting in its box. She slid behind the wheel and started the engine. As the tires crunched over gravel, she glanced in the rearview mirror. The mill disappeared behind the trees, swallowed by distance, by time. On the radio, a local station ran a short memorial segment for Thomas and Evelyn Carter. A familiar voice read their names, followed by a pause long enough to feel sacred. Then a line that caught in her throat. "Some truths are patient. They wait for the right hands to dig them free." Marian smiled, eyes on the horizon. The road curved east toward the highway, golden light spilling across the windshield. She pressed record on her handheld mic and began to speak, voice low and measured, carried by the hum of the tires. "Decades ago, 2 people vanished, and an entire town decided forgetting was easier than facing what they'd done. But the land remembered. It always does." This story isn't about ghosts. It's about what silence costs, and what it takes to bring a name back into the light. If you've been with us through this investigation, thank you. These stories matter, because people like you refuse to look away. So if you want to keep hearing the truth about the cases time tried to bury, subscribe, stay with us, and help keep their voices alive. Because sometimes the truth doesn't whisper, it waits. She clicked stop. The sun dipped behind the ridges, turning the sky the color of old copper. Ahead, the road stretched empty and endless, ribboning through fields of gold. The headlights cut on automatically, twin beams carving into the coming dark. And somewhere behind her, deep in the forest, the water kept running over the place where it had all begun, soft, constant, and unburdened at last.